So ever since Pacquiao versus Crawford fight was off, due to the lack of funds since the investors pulled out, that raised the question, who is boxing pound for pound number one, Terence Crawford, is going to fight next? Now obviously the leading two candidates is Vergil Ortiz and Shawn Porter. And since Shawn Porter happened to be Crawford mandatory that's due, it was a no-brainer that was the fight to make if the Pacquiao fight doesn't come to fruition. I mean, that's what Crawford told the public, and it goes hand to hand with what Shawn Porter wanted next, including the WBO, since this fight was going to satisfy a mandatory defense. Therefore, essentially, this was like hitting three birds with one stone, which is exactly why a lot of people were under the impression that Crawford versus Shawn is next, if it ain't Pacquiao. Then come to find out, there have been an elevation on the WBO rankings, which is a total game changer to what may happen next from the fighting and the business perspective, which I'm gonna emphasize on that in a few. It just means there is no Triller, but there is a DAZN, if you know what I mean. So apparently Shawn Porter have lost his number one mandatory / ranking on the WBO, simultaneously as Vergil Ortiz have been elevated to the number one ranking. And to make matters sweeter for Vergil Ortiz, he's not just a mandatory, he's now the WBO interim champion as well, which is even a more powerful position than a mandatory, as you all see on the screen. With all of the facts being stated, I know many of you are wondering, how the heck Shawn Porter lost his mandatory position, including his number one ranking under the WBO, and got surpassed by Vergil Ortiz in the process? That's the million-dollar question. Well, the answer is not as simple as you think, it's more complex. There's a lot of moving elements on the chessboard. One happened to be Shawn Porter and his poor decision making. The second have something to do with Vergil Ortiz win over Hooker. And last but not least, Bob Arum definitely comes into the equation, as he's not trying to lose another fight to Triller's purse bid, which I'm gonna talk about that in a few. First things first, I know many of you are wondering, how did Shawn Porter lose his mandatory position? Or how can someone lose their mandatory position? The answer for that is by not utilizing their position. If you are a mandatory and you don't petition to fight the champion, or even failing to make the necessary business moves as a mandatory, then most likely you will lose your position. You guys have to realize a fighter cannot be the mandatory forever. There's a time window of when a fighter is the mandatory. And if a fighter doesn't take advantage of that time span, his rank can get thrown out of the window. In fact, Shawn Porter is not the only one who lost his number one ranking. Danny Garcia, prior to that, lost his number one ranking and his mandatory position to Mean Machine, I believe, because Danny Garcia did not utilize his position. For good reasons, because he had plans of fighting Errol Spence instead. Another example is Javier Fortuna. He also lost his number one mandatory for Devin Haney WBC title to Ryan Garcia, which is why Devin Haney fought a voluntary defense against Gamboa, because his own mandatory, Fortuna, refused to fight him. But luckily for Fortuna, Devin Haney is obligated to fight two mandatories, since the champion Lomachenko at the time gave up the belt to Devin Haney in order to duck him. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, since Shawn Porter have been ranked number one under the WBO and a mandatory for Crawford belt prior to the Kell Brook fight, he have now officially lost his position for not utilizing it to begin with. Even though, on more than one occasion, Shawn Porter have been calling out Terence Crawford, claiming he's going to knock him out. That's the fight he wants. However, actions speak louder than words. I have been telling the public from day one, Shawn Porter needs to petition as a mandatory to fight Terence Crawford next. If he doesn't, then he's going to lose his mandatory position. And guess what? That's exactly what ended up taking place. Like I said, talk is cheap. Actions speak louder than words. I have made plenty of videos that went viral, encouraging Shawn Porter to make the right move to no prevail. In fact, I don't have to tell Shawn Porter what to do. He said it out of his own mouth. He told the PBC podcast the difference between Shawn Porter now and then is that Shawn Porter now knows the business in and out, and we know we can force the fight on Terence Crawford since Shawn Porter is the mandatory, right?
Do you see it happening, though? What percentage chance would you give it?
Oh, Lordy. I don't know. I think, and I also think that there's a lot of different possibilities to making a fight happen between myself and Terence Crawford. I think at this point now everybody's forgotten that WBO ranked me the #1 contender for his title, which means I'm a mandatory fight, which means you can't just go on and fight someone else. You have to deal with the mandatory. Now you can pay the mandatory off and go and fight someone else, or you do a purse bid to make the fight happen with the mandatory. So I think that is another thing that we have at this point as a advantage is my dad and I, we understand the business and we know the business and we can't quote unquote be screwed by the business, so other fighters don't understand that and they lose their mandatory position and don't know how the fight didn't happen and how they didn't get paid because the fight didn't happen, so I think that collectively I'm just doing everything I can to manage the business, manage the friendship, manage the training and everything else that I got going on right now in life. So it makes every day interesting and it makes every day, gives you something to strive for every day as well.
However, he did exactly the opposite. He let his opportunity go by losing his position, which only could mean one thing. Shawn Porter never wanted the Terence Crawford fight to begin with, at least not sincerely. Because if he did, he would have had forced the fight like he claimed he could, like we know he could have. It seems like Shawn Porter is more interested in having an Errol Spence rematch as a mandatory whenever that's due, because obviously Errol Spence just fought Danny Garcia, which was ruled as his mandatory. For the meantime, Shawn Porter most likely go the easy route, which is the Conor Ben route if he could land that fight, which will be a big fight in the UK overseas. In the meantime, Vergil Ortiz, he beat Hooker and replaced Shawn Porter as the #1 WBO fighter with the interim title as well. And last but not least, Bob Arum. We all know he got a great relationship with the WBO, where they will do whatever Bob want them to do. Remember, he gave Lomachenko a title opportunity against Salido with only one fight as a pro. And to make matter worse, Lomachenko lost to Salido and fought for another title shot the next fight, which is mind-blowing because that broke the WBO rules, which is you cannot fight for the title if you coming off a loss. However, when it comes to these fighters on the hope list, they will change and bend the rules. I mentioned all of that to point out that Bob Arum have very strong ties with the WBO, which there's no secret. As many videos I dropped that went viral, I know Bob Arum got the memo. After what Teofimo did to ESPN with the Triller stunt move, Bob Arum came to a realization that he is not going to take another L this year. And I'm pretty sure Bob, he couldn't wait for the right moment to replace Shawn Porter with Vergil Ortiz as Crawford mandatory. If you may wonder, why? What is the big deal, Akhi? The answer is simple. Bob Arum is in the driving seat. He's in control. Now he does not have to pay the right price or even overpay for Crawford versus Shawn. Shawn Porter can still get the Crawford fight, don't get me wrong. However, he just wouldn't be able to take it to purse bid the way Teofimo did. So there is no Triller, PBC, DAZN bidding on the fight. In other words, this fight went from competition to monopoly real quick. So Shawn Porter, if he really want the Crawford fight, at the moment in time, he has to take whatever Bob Arum gives him. It might be $2 million, it might be more than 2, or it might be nothing more, nothing less. What leverage does Shawn Porter have, since he was never in motion when he was Crawford mandatory, which him sitting still tells us that he was never really that interested in the fight. Therefore, we all can anticipate Terence Crawford next fight to be either Vergil Ortiz or Shawn Porter. I could see Vergil taking the fight now because you have a beast like Jaron Ennis, who's an equal threat, and he's just a contender. On the other hand, you have a path to Terence Crawford, boxing pound for pound #1 for a title. It's a no-brainer to me. With that being stated, drop your thoughts in the comment section below, subscribe below, and click on the notification bell to be continued on the next episode of Akhi TV. Peace, and we on to the next one.